So in tonight's meditation, I would like to kind of take two dimensions. One dimension would be expansion and contraction. And the other dimension would be self and space. And then through the guidance, I would like to kind of draw your attention to how the self or space manifests in the presence of contraction or expansion. So I think the hypothesis here is that in situations or like when we experience contraction, then the self is also strongly present. Or when kind of if we quantify the space of our awareness, then if we kind of calculate somehow the ratio of how much of that space or how much of that object that we are perceiving, how much it is filled by something that we can label as the self, or how much it is filled by something that's labeled as space. And similarly, with expansion and contraction, how much of our space of awareness is filled with noticeable contraction, or how much of our space of how much the space of our awareness is filled with noticeable expansion or openness. Another thing to note is that the space of our awareness itself can be contracted or expanded. So the contracted space of awareness would be the case when we are focusing on something narrow. So then kind of the aperture of our focus falls on a contracted space. And the opposite would be when we have a very wide, spacious awareness, when we can kind of observe the whole field of our body, mind, and the surrounding area to somewhat similar granularity, or somewhat to a similar extent when we can maintain them in our awareness. And another question, so is it clear to you how to identify contraction in our sensory experience? For instance, when you breathe, if you focus on, for example, the movement of the chest, you could say, for instance, that when the chest falls down, that the space of your body is somehow contracting. And when you're inhaling, when the chest is opening up, that the space of your body is somehow expanding. And at the same time, if you kind of reverse it, when you exhale, then the space outside of your body is expanding. And when you inhale, the space outside of your body is being pushed. Or for instance, a pinching type of pain could be perceived as some kind of contraction. Or frowning could be perceived as some kind of contraction, while smiling or like joy is typically an expansive experience. And then let's do a similar kind of probe just to make sure that we are kind of on the same page before I begin the guidance. So in terms of self and space, are you familiar with how the feeling of you being there inside your space of awareness manifests, or where it manifests? Would you be able to point somewhere where you observe the world from, or where the thinker is located? But generally, for example, when you observe an object, very often it appears that there is a feeling that there is an entity here, and that there is some kind of action of observation that flows in a direction towards the object, and that then there is an object here that is being perceived. And we can feel that feeling of the thinker or the observer or the doer would typically feel it somewhere around our head. Some people feel it around their chest area. Others, I mean, it's also possible to feel it anywhere in the body. Usually it's linked to the physical body, and it can hover around the physical body. And sometimes the experience of where this cluster of sensations is located can vary, but it is important for me before I start the guidance that you generally understand what I'm inviting you to note. All right. And in this case, when I say space, that refers to the part of your experience which is not the self. So if you just take these binary distinctions of self and everything else, I will call that space for the sake of this meditation. So for instance, if the thinker or the viewer is located somewhere here, for example, then there can be a very strong kind of cluster of sensations related to that here, but then this space here would not be the self. Like the thinker is not in this space here on the side or in the air around it. That's just not it. So that's what I mean by space. So you can do this practice with eyes open or eyes closed. If you are sure that you can remain undistracted with eyes open, that it does not hinder your practice to be able to perceive objects around you, then you can keep your eyes open. One thing that you can do if you choose to keep your eyes open is to kind of direct the gaze slightly down and to kind of allow it to land softly somewhere on the surface, and try to make that surface not too cluttered so that there are not many things that would distract your attention by making you think about them. And if you prefer to keep your eyes closed, then just keep your eyes closed. So in this particular meditation, it is not necessarily our goal to make ourselves extremely comfortable, but do make sure to get in a posture that you can reasonably maintain for, say, about 30 minutes. And that being said, pain or physical discomfort is not an obstacle for this practice whatsoever. So let's start by tuning the mind into the space of meditation. And take a few deeper breaths. And let your attention follow the stream of breath. It doesn't need to be locked in on any particular spot. Just allow the attention to kind of synchronize with the breath and follow the flow, the stream of air through the body. And then allow the breath to fall into its spontaneous, natural pattern. The body knows how to breathe itself. Still keeping attention on the breath and nowhere particular. Allowing it to just fall on the stream of air. Remember that if you ever get distracted during this practice, just gently bring yourself to the task, the last instruction that you can remember, or the last point that you can remember. That is one of the most important parts of practice, to just be gentle. And keep bringing your mind back to the task. And now allow attention to just spontaneously, in whichever course of movement it wants to take, just scan the domain in which the breath moves the body, in which the sensations of the breath are felt in the body. That can be the nose area, for example, the back of the mouth, the throat, the chest, maybe even shoulders, stomach, abdomen. So just observe this rising and falling of the breath. Rising and falling of the breath. Rising and falling of the breath. And try gently to observe expansion and contraction in this process. So try and see where in this rising and falling, in this movement of the breath, which aspect of it would you characterize as expansion? And which aspect of it would rather be the contraction? You can make mental notes, mental labels, expansion, or even if you follow a longer process that's continually expanding further and further, you can even make a chain of labels, expansion, or a chain of labels, contraction. Or for instance, if you find expansion or contraction in any other domain of your sensory experience, you can include it too. And if the breath remains the most salient and most accessible part of your experience, then just observe it there and note it there. And now try and be aware of contraction. So try and locate all of those experiences in your body-mind, or even further, if that's available to you, that you would somehow characterize as contraction in any form that you can experience. If you experience some very dense sensations, try and identify and note only those in your experience. So allow the focus of your attention to just scan the area, following wherever contraction appears. And then if that area no longer seems so contracted, allow the focus to find another contracted area and experience. And remember that you can always find it in the breath. Maybe you also find it in your sitting area or in some muscles. Perhaps in the ears. Maybe there is some contraction in how you're holding your hands. And when none of that seems contracted, there is always contraction in the breath. So allow your mind to be agile and to go after these sensations. And if you find more granular aspects of experience that feel ever so slightly more contracted, just allow the mind to explore them. Allow your focus to scan it. And now, while doing this scanning of contraction, try and see who is scanning. Who is doing the looking? Where is the observer located? And when you have a look, try and estimate how much of that area is filled by the sensations of the observer and where they are located. And if those sensations move in any way, just look again and do the same assessment again. Where and how much of that area is filled with the sensations of the observer? And when you make that assessment, try and take a mental snapshot of that. Try and intentionally remember that. Take an observation of that moment. Keep moving the focus. So it could happen that sensations change. And just allow the focus to move and to find another place of the observer, another seat of the observer. And take the same snapshot. Try and notice if you can observe any form of contraction in the experience of the observer. Try and notice if there is any distinction between that area of experience that appears to be the observer and the area surrounding it. Again, do an inquiry of what part of this space filled with the observer and the remaining space, what part of this feels contracted and what part of it feels expanded or open. And those shapes might move through the area of awareness. Just find them again. And you can now let go of that. And we will instead pay attention to expansion. So you can find any part of experience that feels expansive, that feels like it's open, that feels like it's not particularly filled with sensations, that feels perhaps slightly warm. So there are multiple sensory experiences that we can associate with expansion. And remember that you can always find it in the breath. So let the focus, let your mind just identify and scan the experience and identify all those areas that are expanding. And if it helps you, if you're following some processes or sensations of slightly longer duration, you can continuously note expand, 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 expand. Find and note expansion. And try and allow your awareness to expand beyond the space of the physical body. Try and intentionally become aware of the area around the head, behind the back, left to the body, right to the body. Try and become of the expansive area of the room surrounding you. Thinking about the sky, thinking about the area surrounding the building that you're currently in. Observe this expansiveness in your own awareness, in your own attention, how the attention itself can become expanded and vast. And find areas of expansion in the awareness itself. So cover the space of the body and the whole vast space around you. And notice expansion wherever you can perceive it. how parts of your experience are growing, parts of your experience that feel vast. Parts of your experience that become more airy. Parts of your experience that are increasing in size. And the experience of the attention when it's wide, when it's taking the room as its object, when it's taking expansion as its object. And while trying not to shrink the space of attention or the wide coverage of attention, keep the attention wide and inquire again. Who is looking in this vast space of awareness? Where is the seat of the observer? And again, scan this large space of awareness. Scan for the presence of the observer or the thinker, or that which creates an intention or action. Try and locate where it is, and try and take a snapshot of how much space it is filling. And try and observe it closer, noticing that in order to get close, attention does not need to shrink. Attention does not need to become narrow. And whenever it moves, locate it again. And if you are finding it fixed in one position, then allow that position itself to expand, as if being magnified through the lens of the awareness. And then explore what it is made of. And if it reveals itself as some kinds of sensation, or if it becomes void of sensations, just observe expansion and space again, and try again and find the observer. Notice that in the impermanence of the whole field of experience, in the impermanence of expansion and contraction, there is the impermanence of the self as well. Notice how there is no stable or fixed point in experience that is the observer, that does not disappear or dissolve upon closer inspection. There are only sensations emerging with different kinds of interpretations depending on the context, and congealing into something that we experience as ourself. And now again, allow your awareness to open and to expand onto the larger area of experience. That can be roughly the room that you're in, or also smaller is all right. Whatever is comfortable for you to maintain in your awareness. And try and find multiple points of contraction, multiple areas of contraction within your awareness, including potentially that of the observer, and compare them at the sensory level. Just compare how the tingling mass of sensations appears in these areas. So if there is something about the experience of the observer that can be compared with the experience of contraction in another part of experience. And whenever you find a similarity, take note of that. And then try and find another one. And another one. And another one. So try and find any two or slightly more points of contraction in experience and compare how these sensations appear, how these sensations manifest. Let's do that for a minute longer. And now let go of that exercise. Just allow the attention to synchronize with whatever appears in awareness. Releasing the objects from inquiry. And when it feels right, you can come back to the group.